Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Sudanese woman flogged by police. Yemeni opposition to boycott parliamentary elections. And US Attorney General defends FBI sting operations against Muslim Americans. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
All eyes are focused on the Palestinian city of Ramallah, where President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is scheduled to meet with the US Special Mideast Envoy, George Mitchell. During the meeting, Abbas hopes to receive an answer from the US administration regarding his letter that was delivered to Washington by Palestinian chief negotiator, Saeb Erekat. Abbas asked the US administration for guarantees prior to any future direct or indirect talks with Israel. Among the guarantees demanded by Abbas is a complete halt to Israeli settlement activities in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Abbas also called on the US to recognize a Palestinian state on land occupied in 1967, with East Jerusalem its capital. He also called for the deployment of a third international force along the future Palestinian borders. In addition, Abbas demanded that all final issues, especially the refugees, be solved in accordance with international laws. The US State Department described the talks held yesterday between George Mitchell and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as positive. The State Department said in a statement that talks between the two men focused on finding ideal ways to tackle the core issues and move towards a lasting peace. Netanyahu also described his talks with Mitchell as positive. He said that he is glad Washington decided to discuss the fundamental issues at the heart of the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, and not to stop at marginal points.
I welcome the fact that we will now begin discussing core issues and try to narrow the gaps. In fact, we're paving the way by removing these obstacles. This means we will return to direct talks in a bid to reach a general framework for a peace agreement.
European Union foreign ministers meeting in Brussels expressed regret that Israel failed to extend the building freeze in Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria. The EU diplomats emphasized the need for a negotiated settlement, but pointed out they were prepared to recognize a Palestinian state when appropriate. Officials said a significant number of member states favored a unilateral declaration of independence for the Palestinians if the peace process remained stalled.
I think it's important to restate our position, which is the position of the UK and the whole of the EU, that we support a settlement based on 1967 borders with a just settlement for refugees, with Jerusalem as the future capital of both states.
We call for immediate, sustained and unconditional opening of the crossings for the flow of humanitarian aid and commercial goods and people to and from Gaza. In this respect, we've welcomed the recent Israeli announcement of new measures to facilitate exports and are looking forward to their swift implementation.
The human rights group B'Tselem has issued a report condemning the Israeli justice system for the alleged harsh treatment of Palestinian youngsters when they are detained for throwing stones and rioting. IBA's Ortal Dahan has that story.
Tensions have steadily been rising in the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Silwan over the past year since 500 Jewish residents have settled into the area. B'Tselem claims 81 Palestinian minors were charged with stone throwing and rioting in the past year, many of them repeat offenders.
The fact that the children are suspected of breaking the law doesn't mean that the police are allowed to break the law in dealing with them. This goes, first of all, to nighttime arrests.
Parents of the adolescents say Israeli police arrive in the middle of the night and unlawfully take their children for interrogation without any parental consent or an accompanying adult.
The Israeli police are making arrests of youngsters and teenagers of all ages that have been involved in the disturbances. As far as the law is concerned, anyone who breaks the law will be questioned, arrested. In all of those cases, they've either been escorted by their parents to the police stations where they're questioned, or CCTV cameras which are used.
The Israeli human rights organization insisted that they are not trying to prove if the minors are breaking the law, but rather ensuring that the police are using correct procedures during investigations. 13-year-old Mohammed Mansour said he was shoved into a car by undercover police where law enforcement officials handcuffed and blindfolded him after he accidentally walked into a crowd of masked Palestinian children throwing stones at Jewish residents. Tension between the co-inhabitants began when the Jerusalem municipality proposed the expansion of an archaeological park last February that would have forced the demolition of several Palestinian homes. This is Ortal Dahan for IBA News.
Veteran U.S. diplomat Richard Holbrooke is dead. Holbrooke, who enjoyed talking about his Jewish roots, died yesterday after being hospitalized in Washington on Friday, suffering from a torn aorta. He was 69. Holbrooke's parents were Jewish immigrants to America. His mother came from Germany and his father was born in Warsaw. He became more interested in Judaism after his third wife, who was raised Catholic, discovered that her parents were Hungarian Jews who kept their Jewish identity secret. He will probably best be remembered for brokering the Dayton Accords, the peace deal that ended the Bosnian War.
هدمت السلطات الإسرائيلية 12 مسكنا من الصفيح تعود.
Israeli authorities demolished 22 Palestinian houses and a Palestinian school that was under construction in Hirbat Tana village, east of Nablus in the West Bank. Ghassan Dahalas, a Palestinian official monitoring settler activities in the West Bank, said a military force with support from bulldozers stormed the village and started wide-scale demolitions and announced it was a closed military zone. Dahalas explained that this was the third time Israeli authorities conducted such an operation. They demolished 45 residential houses during their last operation. Israel's latest war on the Gaza Strip had an immense effect on the life of Gazans, especially when their houses were completely destroyed by Israeli forces. The following report by our correspondent Saeed Sawarki gives us a sneak peek into the suffering of Gaza's residents.
This is the cornerstone placed for one of the houses that was completely destroyed in the latest war on the Gaza Strip. The stone is part of the plan to reconstruct about 100 homes here. For about 2 years, since Israeli forces annihilated their home, the Abdu Rabbah family has lived in this humble tin hut. The family members are scattered. The mother and father live in the tin hut, while the children stay in a rented place not far from the Abdu Rabbah ranch. They are waiting for the reconstruction of Gaza and are running out of patience. Internal disputes and the complicated political situation delayed their dream of rebuilding for 2 years.
You know, of course, that after the war, everything we owned was destroyed. The home and ranch were completely annihilated. It was a huge catastrophe. People were in shock and couldn't comprehend what happened. When we came back, the land and the homes were all destroyed. We didn't know where to go. Many people lost their houses.
While waiting for a major reconstruction program in Gaza that has never been carried out, Abdul Muati, who's lost his home in 2 airstrikes, found new hope after the Kuwaiti-based International Mercy Association cooperated with member countries of the Gaza Reconstruction Fund to rebuild 100 homes in the north. The only problem with this humble plan is it is only set to rebuild less than half of the destroyed houses in the area.
This project is not going to completely rebuild everything that was here before. Only 130 meters instead of 300 meters of the length of the landscape is going to be restored, and I have to pay out of my own pocket for rebuilding my house. Of course, there was a major reconstruction plan launched in Sharm el-Sheikh, but it's not clear whether that project will continue or not.
Shima still has terrible memories of the war she witnessed in this house before it was destroyed. Therefore, her only condition for returning to this house after it is rebuilt is that her room be on the west side.
When they started talking about reconstruction, I told them about this room because it was the safest room I saw on the map. I initially wanted another room facing the east, but that's the direction that artillery and shelling comes from.
Israeli forces wiped out most of the houses in Abdu Rabbah Ranch from its map. Citizens who lost their homes waited during the Palestinian reconciliation process with more patience than other citizens.
Our reconstruction came as part of the first phase of the program. Thousands of homes were destroyed either partially or completely. It is considered the first step to rebuild what was destroyed. But the more important reconstruction program everyone is waiting for is the Palestinian reconciliation. All people are anticipating the reconciliation in order for real reconstruction to take place.
100 houses will be reconstructed within 130 meters instead of the original 300 meters of land in the northern Gaza Strip. This is still better than an endless wait for reconstruction programs that are postponed until further notice. Saeed Sawerki, Russia Today, Gaza.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad met with Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa al-Thani, in Doha today to discuss the formation of a government in Iraq in addition to the developments in Lebanon. Replying to a question from Al Jazeera, Assad said that he did not want to talk to the media about the propositions to resolve the issues in Lebanon, but preferred that they be announced by the Lebanese, not Syrians or Qataris. The Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa al-Thani, reaffirmed his country's trust in Syria and Saudi Arabia's keenness to exert the effort necessary for Lebanon to avoid any strife. This came at the end of what the Lebanese referred to as a political storm that followed the stormy weather which swept across the country in the last few days. Meanwhile, Lebanese Minister of State for Administrative Reform in Hezbollah, Mohammed Finish, said that the expected indictment that the world, especially Lebanon, is concerned about is nothing but a blatant way to distort the resistance's image. He warned that the indictment will have repercussions on the country's stability. Our correspondent, Busher Abdel al-Samad, takes us to Lebanon's political scene today in the following report.
انحسرت العاصفة لكن سماء بيروت بقيت مكفهرة.
The storm has subsided, but the sky in Beirut is still gloomy. The political scene remains tense with anticipation for a détente that has yet to show any clear signs.
وبينما تبقى الآمال معقودة على ترجمة عملية لما يحكى عن
While hopes are hanging on the practical interpretation of the Syrian-Saudi effort preceding the issuance of an indictment regarding Rafiq al-Hariri's assassination, the pace of political escalation has increased remarkably due to the indictment and the false witness issue.
فحزب الذي بدت أوساطه لفترة غير بعيدة.
Hezbollah, which not long ago seemed to be in line with the efforts for internal peace, returned to giving speeches warning that things will be different after the issuance of the indictment and that the ball will roll in a negative way.
ستتدحرج بشكل سلبي.
إذا صدر هذا القرار وتبنت المحكمة.
If this indictment is issued and the tribunal accepts it, for your safety, we demand you fulfill your obligations and commitments. What will happen? What will the repercussions and effects of such an indictment be on the stability of the country, organizations, and the government?
The other party responded to this position in a tone just as sharp. At a gathering, the leadership of the Future movement threatened to cut off the hand that extends to Lebanon.
We announce here frankly, clearly, and with transparency that we will cut off every finger that ventures to rise in the face of our dear Lebanon, and we will tear out every eye that will look with bad intentions at the Special International Tribunal for Lebanon.
Some have advised not to take the verbal escalation too far, especially when the internal political scene is in the control of the Syrian-Saudi initiative.
What Hezbollah is saying is, come, let's reach an understanding and make a settlement before the indictment. So the settlement shouldn't be based on the result of the indictment or be against it or anything. However, we must lay down standards for how to deal with the indictment when it is issued, especially when the International Tribunal Court made 3 dangerous amendments.
But people who have this opinion also believe that a détente could be achieved during the Parliament's next session, scheduled to take place Wednesday afternoon. A few hours are left before the deadline for Daniel Belmar to issue the indictment several days before the holidays. Speculations are circulating in these few hours about whether the indictment will be delivered on time or postponed according to the results of foreign efforts. Bushir Abdel Samad, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
اعتقلت قوى الأمن السودانية لعدة ساعات عددا من النساء اللائي حاولن التجمع أمام وزارة العدل احتجاجا.
Sudanese security forces detained a number of women for hours who had tried to gather in front of the Ministry of Justice. The women were protesting laws they consider unfair to women, such as a flogging penalty. A video that showed a young Sudanese woman being flogged enraged the Sudanese people. Several Sudanese groups have called for a wide-scale protest against the offensive laws for women. Meanwhile, the Sudanese police said the timing of the release of this video on the internet coincided with World Human Rights Day, and it aimed to exert more pressure on Sudan and distort the legal penalties.
تحاول المفوضية العليا لشؤون اللاجئين التابعة للأمم المتحدة مساعدة النازحين.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is trying to help Somalis who were displaced during the war through a series of small projects. The Commissioner called on the international community to provide more aid for Somali refugees. Zaina Badawi reports from Somalia.
The Kalkayo refugee camp in northern Somalia shelters about 3,000 Somalis who were displaced during one of the longest wars in Africa. Despite the misery of the residents of this UN camp, they still provided a warm welcome for us.
These people, they have been suffering a lot, and they now try to live with the current situation. They also want urgent help from around the world and anywhere.
The UN High Commissioner for Refugees is trying to help Somali refugees earn a living through projects like this one. These women are sewing clothes to sell to the United Nations, which will distribute them around the world. But the women living in the refugee camp are subjected to sexual assault and rape, and most of the victims are too scared to talk about the crimes. This woman said 6 people raped her on her way home from work, and she did not recognize them. Her attackers also stabbed her several times. This shows how serious these cases are and the urgency necessary for authorities to resolve this kind of violence against women. The UN Commissioner for Refugees is trying to improve the situation in Somalia under extremely difficult circumstances.
Looking at the situation in Somalia, we do not see
Looking at the situation in Somalia, we do not see any potential for improvement. There are many things that could be done in a better way than they are now. Therefore, we call on the international community to provide more support to the Somali people.
It seems Somalis are grateful for the help they receive, but it is hard for them to forget what they lost during 20 years of war.
The United States top attorney Eric Holder says sting operations are necessary in the so-called war on terror. He made the comments in a speech to a Muslim rights group. Press TV's Colin Campbell has more from Washington.
U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder spoke to the Muslim Advocates, a national legal advocacy and civil rights organization. He told the group that stings are essential to fight the war on terror, like he has in other speeches.
We are bound and determined to try to find those people and to try to stop them in whichever way that we can.
To make his point, he referenced 19-year-old Somali-American Mohammed Osman Mohammed, who allegedly thought a call from his mobile phone in late November would detonate a bomb in the northwestern city of Portland, Oregon. But he instead dialed the number to the Federal Bureau of Investigations in a sting operation. Critics of sting operations say that Mohammed may have been coaxed into the attempted bombing by the Federal Bureau of Investigations, noting that in particular he was only 18 years old when he came to the attention of the Federal Bureau. Members of the Council on American and Islamic Relations say cases such as these border on entrapment.
It should be the FBI's role to stop
terror attacks and terror plots. It shouldn't be their role to manufacture terror plots.
National security experts in Washington explain why the Department of Justice believes operations like these are necessary.
The reason they do is because they find it hard to get people in the act of doing some act of terrorism, so they have to spur it on a little bit by providing people with bombs or fake bombs or with incendiary language that they may use.
However, Mohammed's case is simply the latest of several similar sting operations that have led in recent months to charges against Muslims plotting alleged terrorist attacks.
Well, we've seen too many cases where the FBI actually instigates the alleged plot.
In October, the FBI arrested a Pakistani-born Virginia man, Farouk Ahmed, accusing him of attempting to bomb the Washington area metro rail system. While Ahmed allegedly chose the location, the FBI suggested he take part in the plan to bomb metro stations. According to court papers, he had allegedly expressed a desire to kill Americans in Afghanistan, according to the FBI.
When you cross into promoting these kinds of things, that's where we have concerns.
Mohammed and Ahmed are in custody awaiting trial. Colin Campbell, Press TV, Washington.
Yemeni authorities have deployed security units around the nation's parliament in Sana'a. This news comes after the joint meeting parties, JMP's opposition coalition, said they will boycott the parliamentary elections next year. The opposition called for what they referred to as an action of anger against the new electoral law.
The new electoral law in Yemen is sparking a new wave of political debate among Yemeni legislators and party leaders. The Joint Meeting Parties Coalition, which is the leading opposition group in Yemen, has officially announced its decision to boycott the legislative elections set to take place in April 2011. The JMPs said that its decision was in response to the enactment of a new electoral law that was unilaterally approved by the ruling General Congress Party, GCP, and its parliamentary bloc. The JMPs said the vote is a violation of the Constitution and laws, not to mention the fact that it is a breach of the February 2009 agreement signed between the two parties. The opposition called on its followers to take to the streets to protest against what it referred to as authoritarian and repressive practices. According to the February 2009 accord, the opposition and ruling party agreed to delay the legislative elections for 2 years to April 2011, during which time the parties were to launch a national dialogue among the opposition, the loyalists, and the civil society organizations. The initiative aims to help legislators change the presidential parliamentary system to a parliamentary system and a decentralized administration. The ruling GCP vowed to hold the parliamentary elections on time in April 2011, in accordance with the newly approved amendments. The GCP said the national dialogue has failed to bring about an agreement on the constitutional amendments and reforms, both at the electoral and political level. The GCP's announcement has provoked the opposition and sparked a new round of political debate on Yemeni streets. This will likely fuel the already tense situation in Yemen, especially in the aftermath of the Saada war. The country is facing pressure from the southern movement, which is trying to break away from the north, and pressure over al-Qaeda's activities on Yemeni soil in the aftermath of the postal bomb attacks. The country also faces many difficult economic and social problems.
The Sudanese army reported that a military force from the People's Liberation Movement, backed by tanks and armored vehicles, has entered the disputed region of Abbas, a move Khartoum says will delay the referendum and fuel hostility in the region.
Meanwhile, an Arab League monitoring delegation has arrived in the Sudanese capital to help remove some of the obstacles facing the Sudanese Referendum Commission.
Despite the escalation of rhetoric and the exchange of blame between the Sudan People's Liberation Movement and the ruling National Congress Party, the two sides held a meeting in Juba to tackle post-referendum issues. Among the issues are citizenship, security, international treaties, natural resources such as oil and water, and other economic and legal issues.
We made significant progress on the issues of security, citizenship, naturalization, and international treaties. We need to do more with economic and financial issues, as these types of issues require more effort due to their complexity.
The meeting comes a day after the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel on Sudan urged both sides to work seriously toward reaching a consensus on issues pertinent to the future of the Sudanese people. Many Sudanese are hoping both sides will be able to reach a general agreement on post-referendum issues.
We made progress on some of the outstanding issues. We still have a lot of work to do, especially in areas of economic affairs, financial and natural resources, including oil.
The meeting ended with both sides agreeing to hold another meeting December 18th, vowing to continue talks over post-referendum issues. Marwa Zain, Nile TV, Juba.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible from support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news. Read our blog. Get transcripts of past shows and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.